The newspapers called him dead. The frontier celebrated his demise, but legends don't die. They reload. In a world where your name is your only currency and survival means outsmarting everyone who wants you buried, one man refused to stay in his grave. This is the story of how a humiliated outlaw and a voiceless drifter became the most dangerous partnership the American frontier had ever seen. If you're ready for a tale of defiance, betrayal, and brotherhood forged in gunpowder, stay until the end. And let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this legend travels. The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Redemption Creek, a frontier town so small it barely warranted a name on any map worth reading. But today, it had earned its place in history, or so the lawmen believed. Sheriff Marcus Webb stood tall on the wooden steps of his office, chest puffed out like a rooster claiming his henhouse. Behind him, 3 deputies arranged 4 bodies in a grim display, propping them against the hitching post like macabre trophies. A crowd gathered, drawn by morbid curiosity and the promise of justice finally served. "Ladies and gentlemen," Webb's voice carried across the street, silencing the murmurs. "Today marks the end of terror in this territory. The Cain gang is no more." Applause erupted. Women dabbed their eyes with handkerchiefs. Men nodded with grim satisfaction. Children pressed forward, wide-eyed, to glimpse the fallen villains who'd haunted their nightmares. Webb gestured grandly toward the bodies. "That there is Dutch Morrison, shot dead trying to cross into Mexico. Next to him, we got Jesse Cain, found face down in a creek with his own knife in his back. And those 2 pretty boys are the Hollister twins, killed in a shootout outside Santa Fe." The crowd pressed closer, studying the dead faces with a mixture of fear and fascination. "But the real prize," Webb continued, his voice dropping to a dramatic whisper that somehow carried even further, "is the man we got locked up inside. The fastest gun the frontier ever feared. The devil himself in a dusty coat, Ryder Cain." The name sent a ripple through the gathering. Ryder Cain, the whispered terror of every homestead, from Colorado to the Texas border. The man who could draw and fire before most men could blink. The outlaw whose very shadow was said to carry death. Inside the jail, slumped in a corner cell, a man laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed off the stone walls. But that man wasn't Ryder Cain. 3 days earlier and 60 miles north, a different scene had unfolded in the scrubland outside a nowhere junction called Bitter Wells. The ambush had been perfect, too perfect. Ryder Cain had sensed it the moment they crested the ridge, that prickling awareness that came from 10 years of staying alive when everyone wanted you dead. The abandoned stagecoach sitting in the middle of the trail. The too quiet afternoon. The absence of buzzards despite the broken wheel and scattered luggage. "I don't like it," he'd said, reining in his horse. Dutch Morrison, older and greedier, had waved him off. "You don't like nothing, Ryder. That's your problem. Always seeing ghosts." "Ghosts keep me breathing." "This keep you breathing too," Dutch had grinned, patting his saddlebag. "Stage like that? Bound to have payroll. Maybe even mining company gold." Jesse Cain had sided with Dutch. He always did. The Hollister twins just wanted action. They didn't care which way the wind blew as long as there was shooting at the end of it. Ryder had been outvoted in his own gang. They'd ridden down. The rifles had opened up from both sides, hidden in the rocks, buried in the sage, positioned with military precision. Not lawmen, bounty hunters. The organized kind, the ones who worked in packs and split rewards like businessmen dividing profits. Dutch went down first, 3 bullets finding him before he cleared leather. Jesse made it 5 yards before a rifle slug took him through the throat. The Hollister twins fought back, their pistols blazing, but numbers and position won out. They died together, the way they'd lived, their blood mixing in the dust. Ryder had done what he did best. He survived. While the others charged forward into the kill zone, he'd wheeled his horse hard left, spurring toward the rocky outcrop where he'd spotted muzzle flash. 2 shots from his Colt had sent 1 bounty hunter tumbling. A 3rd shot took another through the shoulder, buying him the seconds he needed. His horse had taken a bullet meant for him, screaming and going down hard. Ryder hit the ground rolling, came up firing, emptied his gun into the rocks and ran, sprinting through the sage and cholla while bullets kicked up dirt at his heels. He'd made it to a dry wash, slid down the embankment, and kept running. Behind him, the shooting stopped. Voices called out. Professional, controlled. They'd count the bodies. Realize one was missing. Start hunting. Ryder ran until his lungs burned and his legs threatened to give out. He ran until the sun started its descent and the shadows grew long. He ran until he found a cave, barely more than a crack in the sandstone, and crawled inside. That's where he stayed for 2 days, bleeding from a graze across his ribs and a deeper wound in his thigh, where a rock shard had torn through when his horse went down. No water, no food, just darkness and pain and the bitter taste of failure. On the 3rd day, weak and half delirious, he'd stumbled into a creek and drunk until his stomach cramped. Then he'd found a road and followed it to a trading post where a half-blind clerk sold him beans and jerky without asking questions. That's where he'd seen the newspaper. The front page had screamed the news in bold type: Cain gang destroyed, notorious outlaws meet Justice Sheriff Webb. Claims victory. Below the headline, a poorly drawn illustration showed 4 bodies laid out in the street. The article named them Dutch Morrison, Jesse Cain, the Hollister twins, and, most important, Ryder Cain himself, allegedly captured and awaiting trial. Ryder had read it 3 times, his hands shaking with something that wasn't weakness. They thought he was dead, or as good as. The article went on to describe how Sheriff Webb had tracked the gang for months, finally cornering them in a desperate standoff. It painted Webb as a hero, a man of unwavering determination who'd brought peace to the territory. It mentioned Ryder Cain only in passing, as a captured criminal, his legend diminished, his reputation destroyed by the simple fact of his survival. The message was clear. Without his gang, Ryder Cain was nothing, a nobody, a joke. Ryder had crumpled the paper in his fist, rage burning through the fog of pain and exhaustion. He'd built that reputation shot by shot, mile by mile, year by year. Every saloon from Dodge City to Tombstone knew his name. Every lawman and outlaw alike understood what it meant when Ryder Cain rode into town. Fast, ruthless, unstoppable. And now they thought he was finished, washed up. Just another footnote in frontier justice. Standing there in that ramshackle trading post, blood still seeping through the bandages he'd wrapped around his wounds, Ryder made a decision that would change everything. He wouldn't disappear. He wouldn't run to Mexico or Canada or wherever outlaws went to fade into obscurity. He would prove to every newspaper, every lawman, every 2-bit bounty hunter in the territory that Ryder Cain was very much alive. And he would make damn sure they never forgot it. The town of Elkhorn sat in a valley between 2 ridges, prosperous by frontier standards. 3 saloons, a proper hotel, a bank that actually had money in it. The kind of place that attracted both opportunity and trouble in equal measure. Ryder arrived on foot, having traded his last silver dollar for a horse so broken down it had died 5 miles outside town. He walked the main street at dusk, his hat pulled low, his coat dusty and stained with old blood. Nobody gave him a second glance. Just another drifter, another nobody passing through. That suited him fine. He needed supplies, ammunition, information, and most of all, he needed a plan. The first saloon he tried was too crowded, too many eyes. The second was run by a man who'd seen Ryder's face on a wanted poster years back. Recognition flickered in his eyes, and Ryder left before questions could form. The third was called the Broken Wheel, a sagging structure at the far end of town where the respectable citizens didn't venture. Perfect. Inside, the air hung thick with tobacco smoke and the sour smell of spilled beer. A dozen men occupied the space, ranch hands by the look of them, plus a few gamblers and one old-timer who appeared to be permanently attached to his corner stool. Ryder approached the bar. The keep was a thick-shouldered man with cauliflower ears and the flattened nose of someone who'd learned his trade in rougher establishments. "Whiskey," Ryder said. "Leave the bottle." The barkeep sized him up, taking in the worn gun belt, the hard eyes, the barely concealed injuries. "Coin first." Ryder placed 3 silver dollars on the scarred wood, the last of his money, stolen from a drunk he'd found sleeping behind the trading post. The barkeep swept them up and produced a bottle of something that might have been whiskey if you were generous with definitions. Ryder claimed a table against the wall where he could watch the door and poured himself a drink. The first swallow burned all the way down, cutting through the fog of exhaustion that had been his constant companion for days. He was on his 3rd glass when the door banged open and trouble walked in. 2 men, big, confident, wearing matched Colts tied down low. Bounty hunters or hired guns, the type who worked in pairs to improve their odds. They scanned the room with the practiced efficiency of predators evaluating prey, their gazes passing over the ranch hands and lingering on Ryder. He didn't move, didn't react, just lifted his glass and took another drink, the picture of a man too tired to care about anything beyond his next swallow. The pair exchanged glances and moved to the bar. Ryder couldn't hear their conversation, but he caught the barkeep's subtle gesture in his direction. So much for anonymity. He'd known it was a risk, stopping in a town this size, but he'd gambled on being dead, on Webb's announcement convincing the world that Ryder Cain was either captured or killed. Apparently some people weren't convinced, or maybe these two were just opportunistic, seeing a lone stranger and smelling easy money. Either way, Ryder was too tired and too angry to run. The taller of the two men approached his table while his partner remained at the bar, hand resting casually near his gun. "Mind if I join you, friend?" Ryder gestured at the empty chair without looking up. "Free country." The man sat, his chair positioned at an angle that gave him a clear draw if needed. Professional. "Name's Garrett. That's my partner, Cole. We're in the business of finding people." "Good for you." "Specifically, we're looking for a man called Ryder Cain. You heard of him?" Ryder took another drink. "Newspaper says he's dead." "Newspaper says a lot of things. Not all of them true." Garrett leaned forward, his voice dropping. "See, Cole and I, we were in Redemption Creek when Webb brought in those bodies. Examined them ourselves. Knew the Hollister twins on site. We tracked them last year, lost them in Nevada. But that fourth body?" He shook his head. "Wrong build, wrong scars, wrong everything." "Sounds like Webb's problem, not mine." "Becomes your problem when there's a $10,000 bounty on a man who's supposed to be dead but might be sitting in this very saloon." Ryder set his glass down carefully, meeting Garrett's eyes for the first time. The bounty hunter saw what he was looking for, the flat, cold stare of a man who'd killed before and would again without hesitation. Garrett's hand drifted toward his gun. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. Ryder's boot caught the underside of the table, flipping it up into Garrett's face. The bounty hunter fell backward, chair clattering, hand fumbling for his weapon. Ryder was already moving, his Colt clearing leather with practiced speed. At the bar, Cole drew fast, faster than most men Ryder had faced. But fast wasn't fast enough. Ryder's first shot took Cole through the shoulder, spinning him away from the bar. His second caught Garrett as the man struggled to his feet, the bullet smashing through his gun hand and sending his Colt skittering across the floor. Both men went down screaming. Ryder stood over them, his gun trained on Garrett's forehead. "You were right about one thing. I'm not dead." He should have killed them both. Every instinct, every lesson learned in 10 years of outlaw life, screamed at him to put bullets through their heads and be done with it. Dead men told no tales. Dead men didn't track you down later, but Ryder had a different idea forming in his mind, something reckless and stupid and perfect. He lowered his gun. "When you heal up, you tell everyone you meet what happened here tonight. You tell them Ryder Cain is alive. You tell them he's faster than ever. You tell them the frontier hasn't seen the last of him." Garrett clutched his ruined hand, his face pale with shock and pain. "You're insane." "Maybe." Ryder backed toward the door, his gun still ready. "But I'm alive, and I'm going to make sure everyone remembers it." He disappeared into the night, leaving behind 2 wounded men and a saloon full of witnesses, the first chapter in what he intended to be a legend reborn. The problem with announcing yourself to the world was that the world started looking for you. Ryder made it 2 days before he realized he'd made a critical error. News traveled fast on the frontier, especially when it involved blood and bullets. Within 48 hours, every bounty hunter, lawman, and opportunistic gunslinger within 100 miles would know he was alive and moving through the territory. He needed help, or at least he needed to disappear long enough to plan his next move. The abandoned line shack appeared like a mirage in the afternoon heat, a leaning structure of weathered wood barely standing against the wind. Ryder approached cautiously, his hand on his gun, but the place looked as dead as everything else in this godforsaken stretch of nothing. Inside, he found the expected: broken furniture, animal droppings, a rusted stove that probably hadn't worked in years, but it had a roof and walls, which made it palace compared to sleeping under the stars with every hunter in the territory tracking him. He was checking the back room when he heard the horse. Ryder moved to the window, peering through a gap in the boards. A single rider approached from the east, young, by the look of him, on a paint horse that had seen better days. The rider sat the saddle wrong, like someone who'd learned to ride out of necessity rather than skill. Lost traveler, probably. Or a fool heading somewhere he shouldn't. Ryder watched as the rider dismounted, tied off his horse, and approached the shack. Not careful enough. Not watching his surroundings. The kind of mistakes that got you killed. The door creaked open. "That's far enough," Ryder said, his Colt appearing in his hand like magic. "State your business." The young man froze, his hands coming up slowly. He was maybe 20, lean and sunburned, wearing clothes that had been mended more times than replaced. But his eyes were old, wary. The eyes of someone who'd seen trouble and learned to navigate it. What struck Ryder most was that the young man didn't speak, didn't try to explain himself or beg for mercy. He just stood there, hands raised, waiting. "Can't talk?" Ryder asked. The young man shook his head. Hand signals, writing, a nod. The young man slowly lowered one hand and made a series of gestures that Ryder didn't understand. Then he pointed to the canteen at his belt, made a drinking motion, and gestured to Ryder, offering water. To the man holding a gun on him. Ryder almost laughed. "You always this trusting of strangers?" The young man's expression didn't change. He just waited, patient as stone, his hand still gesturing toward the canteen. Something about that patience, that calm acceptance of whatever came next, made Ryder lower his gun slightly. "What's your name?" The young man pulled out a piece of paper and a pencil stub, carried ready, like he'd answered this question 1,000 times. He wrote in careful letters, "Eli Boone." "Well, Eli Boone, you picked a bad day to stumble onto this place. Men are hunting me. Dangerous men. You understand?" Eli nodded and wrote again. "Everyone is dangerous." Despite everything, the pain, the exhaustion, the fury that had been burning in his gut for days, Ryder found himself almost smiling. "Can't argue with that." Eli lowered his hands completely, moving with slow deliberation as he untied his canteen and held it out. The offer was clear: water, freely given, no strings attached. Ryder took it, surprised by how dry his throat had become. He drank deeply, the water cool and clean, tasting better than the whiskey he'd been living on. When he handed it back, Eli's expression remained neutral. Not friendly, not hostile, just watchful. "You got somewhere to be?" Ryder asked. Eli shook his head. "Family waiting on you?" Another head shake. "You just drift?" A nod. Ryder studied him more carefully. The worn clothes, the old horse, the careful way he moved. This was someone who lived on the margins, invisible to most people. Someone the world had taught to be silent in more ways than one. "I'm heading south," Ryder said, though he hadn't actually decided that until the words left his mouth. "Planning to make some noise along the way? Dangerous noise? You'd be smart to head the other direction." Eli wrote, "Smart is boring." This time Ryder did laugh, a short, sharp bark of genuine amusement. "You got that right." He should have sent Eli away, should have told him to ride out and forget he'd ever seen this place. But something in the young man's steady gaze, in his calm acceptance of risk, reminded Ryder of himself at that age. Before the gang, before the reputation, when he was just another nobody trying to survive in a world that didn't care if you lived or died. "You know how to shoot?" Ryder asked. Eli nodded and patted the old Remington on his hip, practically an antique but clean and well-maintained. "How about you show me?" They went outside. Ryder set up a line of bottles on a fence rail, remnants from whoever had last occupied this place. He stepped back, gesturing for Eli to take a shot. The young man drew with surprising speed, not as fast as Ryder, but faster than most. His first shot shattered a bottle. The second missed. The third caught another bottle dead center. 2 out of 3. Not bad. "Reload," Ryder said. While Eli worked the cylinder, Ryder drew and fired 3 times. 3 bottles exploded in quick succession, the shots so close together they almost sounded like one. Eli's eyes widened slightly, the first real emotion Ryder had seen from him. "That's what you're dealing with out here," Ryder said. "Men who can shoot like that. Some better. You sure you want any part of this?" Eli thought for a moment, then wrote, Teach me. Ryder stared at those two words. This stranger, this nobody, was asking to learn from him. Not running away, not looking for the easy path, just standing there with his old gun and his quiet determination, willing to step into hell if it meant becoming something more than invisible. It was possibly the stupidest idea Ryder had ever heard, which was exactly why he heard himself saying, "All right, but first rule, you do what I say, when I say it. Out here, hesitation kills. Understand?" Eli nodded. "Second rule, we watch each other's backs. I don't need a partner, but if you're riding with me, you're all in or you're gone. No halfway." Another nod. "Third rule." Ryder paused, realizing he was making this up as he went. "Third rule is, there ain't no third rule. We figure the rest out as we go." For the first time, something like a smile flickered across Eli's face. He extended his hand. Ryder shook it, sealing a partnership that would either forge a legend or get them both killed. Probably both. They spent 3 days at the line shack while Ryder's wounds healed enough for travel. During that time, Eli proved surprisingly useful. He could track, set snares, find water in country that looked dry as bone. He moved quietly, noticed details, and never wasted energy on unnecessary motion. Most importantly, he learned, Ryder taught him to draw faster, not through speed alone, but through economy of movement. He showed him how to read terrain, spot ambushes, identify the tells that separated honest men from dangerous ones. They practiced shooting until Eli's hands were steady and his aim true. And slowly, almost against his will, Ryder found himself talking. At first, just practical things: how to maintain your gun, where to buy ammunition without drawing attention, which towns had sheriffs who shot first and asked questions never. But as the days wore on, the words came easier. He told Eli about the early days, when he was just a kid trying to survive after his father died and left him nothing but debt. How he'd learned to shoot by necessity, stealing to eat, fighting to keep what he stole. How Dutch Morrison had found him half dead in an alley and given him a choice: join the gang or die alone. Eli listened, really listened, in a way most people didn't. Maybe because he couldn't interrupt with his own stories. Maybe because silence was his natural state. But Ryder found it strangely freeing, talking to someone who absorbed every word without judgment. On the third night, sitting by a small fire outside the shack, Ryder asked the question that had been bothering him since they met. "Why can't you talk?" Eli pulled out his paper and wrote for longer than usual. When he held it up, the words were simple but heavy. "Father beat me when I was 6, damaged something, never worked right after." Ryder stared at those words, feeling something cold settle in his chest. "He's still alive?" Eli shook his head. "Good." They sat in silence after that, but it was a different kind of quiet. Understanding, maybe. Recognition of shared scars, visible and invisible. The next morning, Ryder made a decision. "We need money," he announced over breakfast, hardtack and coffee that tasted like dirt. "And we need to make a statement. I'm thinking we hit the payroll office in Copper Ridge." Eli raised an eyebrow, wrote, "Just us two." "That's what makes it perfect. Nobody expects 2 men to hit a guarded payroll. They're watching for gangs, organized operations. We go in quiet, get out fast, and by the time anyone figures out what happened, we're 50 miles gone." "Is it smart?" "Hell no. But remember what you said, smart is boring." Eli actually grinned at that, a quick flash of humor that transformed his whole face for just a second. They broke camp within the hour, riding south toward Copper Ridge, and what Ryder hoped would be the first real step in rebuilding his reputation. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that his escape from Elkhorn had already set events in motion that would change everything. Sheriff Marcus Webb read the telegram 3 times, his satisfaction growing with each pass. Ryder Cain confirmed alive. Wounded 2 bounty hunters in Elkhorn, heading south, pursuing. He'd known, of course, known from the moment he'd seen that 4th body in Bitter Wells that something wasn't right, but he'd made his play anyway, publicly declaring victory, cementing his reputation as the lawman who brought down the Cain gang. Now he had a problem. If word spread that he'd lied, or even just been wrong, about Cain being dead, it would damage everything he'd built. His authority, his legend, his political future. unless he fixed it. Webb smiled, folding the telegram carefully. This could work in his favor. The dangerous outlaw, thought Dead, returns to terrorize the frontier. And Sheriff Marcus Webb, relentless and determined, tracks him down for real this time. The narrative practically wrote itself. He penned a response. Assemble posse. $5,000 bonus for Cain's capture. $10,000 if delivered alive. Then he added one more line. Spread the word. I want every gun in the territory hunting him. Webb sealed the message and handed it to his deputy. Send it to every town from here to the border. I want Ryder Cain found, and I want him brought to me in chains. You really think he's worth all this trouble, Sheriff? Webb leaned back in his chair, his smile widening. Son, that man is worth more than money. He's worth fame. And out here, fame is the only currency that matters. Copper Ridge sat in a valley rich with copper deposits, which meant miners, which meant money flowing through the town like water. The payroll office handled transfers twice a month, money coming in from the big mining operations in Denver, going out to workers who'd break their backs underground for a few dollars a week. Ryder and Eli watched the town from a ridge overlooking the main street. 3 days of surveillance had given them the pattern. 2 guards during the day, 1 at night. The safe was old, but solid. The clerk who ran the office was punctual, predictable, and soft. The kind of man who'd hand over keys rather than take a bullet. Tomorrow night, Ryder said. Wait until midnight. Hit them fast. You take the guard, I'll handle the clerk. We're in and out in 5 minutes. Eli nodded, but his expression was uncertain. He wrote, Killing? Only if we have to, but don't hesitate if it comes to that. Out here, mercy gets you buried. They made camp in an arroyo 2 miles from town, checking their guns, preparing their gear. Ryder felt the old familiar tension building, the razor edge between fear and excitement that came before action. He'd done this 100 times with the gang, but never with just one partner, never with someone who couldn't even shout a warning if things went wrong. You nervous? He asked Eli. A shrug. Then, should I be? Probably. But nervous keeps you sharp. Just remember what I taught you. Fast and clean. Eli cleaned his Remington one more time, his movements methodical and calm. Ryder watched him and felt something unexpected. Pride. In just a few days, this quiet stranger had become someone Ryder could count on. Not because of his skills, though those were improving, but because of his steadiness. His willingness to step into fire without flinching. The kind of partner Ryder had never had, even in the gang. Midnight in Copper Ridge was silent, except for distant piano music from the saloons at the far end of town. Ryder and Eli approached the payroll office from the back alley, moving like shadows. The guard was where he was supposed to be, sitting on a chair by the front door, half asleep. Ryder signaled Eli, who moved around the building's corner while Ryder went in through the back. The lock was simple. 30 seconds with a pick, and Ryder was inside, moving through the dark office toward the front room where the safe sat. Outside, he heard a soft thump, Eli taking care of the guard. No shot, which meant he'd done it quiet. Good. Ryder found the clerk's desk, rifled through the drawers until he found the safe combination written on a scrap of paper. Amateurs. The whole frontier was full of amateurs pretending to be professionals. The safe opened with a heavy click. Inside, payroll envelopes, neat stacks of bills, and most important, a leather pouch containing gold eagles. Enough to keep them going for months. Ryder was loading everything into his sack when he heard the voice behind him. Don't move. He froze, not because of the order, but because he recognized that voice. Garrett, the bounty hunter from Elkhorn, the one whose hand Ryder had shot to pieces. Didn't expect to see me again, did you? Garrett's voice was tight with pain and fury. Tracked you for 3 days. Watched you watching this town. Figured you'd make your move tonight. Ryder's gun was holstered. Garrett's wasn't. The math was simple and brutal. Your hand, Ryder said calmly. How's that healing? Ain't. The click of a hammer being cocked. Doctor says I'll never shoot right-handed again, so I learned left, and the first bullet's got your name on it. Ryder calculated angles, distances, chances. All bad. Garrett had him cold. Then the window exploded. Eli came through in a shower of glass, his Remington already firing. The shot went wide, but it forced Garrett to turn, to divide his attention for just one critical second. Ryder drew. 2 shots. Simultaneous thunder in the enclosed space. Garrett's bullet creased Ryder's shoulder, spinning him sideways. Ryder's bullet took Garrett through the chest, punching him backward into the wall. The bounty hunter slid down, leaving a red smear on the wallpaper. His left hand still gripped his gun, but the strength was leaving him fast. "Should have killed me," Garrett managed, blood bubbling at his lips. "Probably," Ryder agreed. "Learn something new every day." Eli appeared at his side, checking the shoulder wound. It was bleeding, but not serious. Another scar for the collection. Outside, voices shouted. Lights were coming on. The town was waking up. "Time to go," Ryder said, grabbing the money sack. They ran for the back door into the alley toward where they'd tied their horses. Behind them, more shouts, the sound of men organizing. Someone fired a shot, wild, panicked, nowhere close. They mounted up and rode hard into the darkness, the sound of pursuit fading behind them. 3 miles out, Ryder finally allowed himself to relax slightly. He looked over at Eli, who rode beside him with the intense focus of someone discovering what they were truly capable of. "You came through that window," Ryder said. Didn't hesitate. Eli met his eyes and nodded once. Then he smiled, a real smile this time, fierce and alive. They'd done it. Their first job together. Messy, violent, imperfect, but successful. And somewhere in that chaos, in that moment when Eli crashed through glass to save his life, Ryder realized he'd found something he didn't know he was looking for. Not a sidekick, not a follower, a partner. The kind worth riding into hell with. The kind worth building a legend beside. They rode through the night, 2 shadows against the vast frontier darkness, carrying their stolen gold and their newly forged bond toward whatever came next. Behind them, Copper Ridge burned with fury and confusion. Ahead, the territory waited, unknowing, unprepared for what these two would become. The legend was just beginning. The gold from Copper Ridge lasted them 2 weeks before Ryder decided they needed to think bigger. They'd been holed up in a series of abandoned homesteads and forgotten caves, moving every few days to stay ahead of the law. The routine was simple. Ride hard, sleep light, trust no one. Eli had adapted quickly to the outlaw life, his natural silence becoming an asset rather than a limitation. Where other men might have talked themselves into trouble, Eli simply watched and learned. But watching and learning didn't build the kind of reputation Ryder craved. On a gray morning with rain threatening from low clouds, they sat in the ruins of what had once been a ranch house, eating beans cold from the can. Ryder had been studying a newspaper he'd stolen from a general store 3 towns back, reading the same article over and over until the words blurred. "Listen to this," he said, holding up the paper. Sheriff Marcus Webb announced the formation of a territorial task force dedicated to capturing notorious outlaw Ryder Cain, believed to be operating in the Southern Territories. Webb stated that Cain, once thought dead, now poses an even greater threat to law-abiding citizens. Eli looked up from his breakfast, waiting. "Greater threat," Ryder repeated, his voice tight with bitter amusement. "We hit 1 payroll office. 1. And suddenly I'm the devil himself." He crumpled the paper and threw it into the cold fireplace. "You know what the problem is? They're talking about me like I'm still something, but we're doing small-time jobs, penny anti-robberies that any 2-bit outlaw could pull off." Eli wrote, "Copper Ridge worked. Barely. We got lucky, and luck runs out." Ryder stood, pacing the ruined room like a caged animal. "The Cain gang used to hit 3 towns in 1 week. We'd rob a bank in Colorado and be spending the money in Wyoming before anyone knew what happened. That's what made us legends, not sneaking around hitting payroll offices in the middle of the night." "What do you want to do?" Ryder stopped pacing, turned to face his partner. "I want to do something that makes them remember why they feared my name. Something big enough that every newspaper from here to California has to write about it." Eli considered this, then wrote, "Like what?" "I don't know yet, but it's out there. We just have to find it." They broke camp within the hour, riding east toward a town called Silver Point, where Ryder had heard rumors of a cattle auction that drew buyers from across 3 territories. Where there were buyers, there was money. Where there was money, there was opportunity. What Ryder didn't mention to Eli was the other rumor he'd heard, that Silver Point had also attracted the attention of the Dalton brothers, a gang of cutthroat outlaws who made Ryder's old crew look like church deacons. If the Daltons were planning something, it would be big. And maybe, just maybe, There was a way to turn their plans to his advantage. The rain started falling as they crested a ridge overlooking Silver Point. The town sprawled below them, larger than most frontier settlements, with a proper main street lined with two-story buildings. Cattle pens stretched along the western edge, already filling with livestock brought in for the auction. Even from this distance, Ryder could see the activity: cowboys, buyers, speculators, all drawn by the promise of profit. "There," Ryder said, pointing to a substantial brick building near the center of town. "That's the Cattlemen's Bank. During auction week, it'll be holding deposits from every rancher and buyer in the territory. More money than either of us has ever seen in one place." Eli studied the town, his expression thoughtful. Then he wrote, "Too many people, too many guns. That's what makes it impossible. And impossible is what gets remembered." Ryder grinned, feeling the familiar rush of reckless ambition. "Come on, let's get a closer look." They rode into town as the rain intensified, just two more drifters seeking shelter from the weather. Nobody gave them a second glance. The streets were packed with cattlemen and their hands, all of them focused on business. The saloons were doing brisk trade despite the early hour, and the hotel had a sign out front announcing no vacancies. Ryder found a livery stable run by a half-deaf old man who took their horses without asking questions. They paid for 3 days in advance and walked the town, getting a feel for the layout. The bank was impressive by frontier standards: solid brick construction, barred windows, a heavy oak door that looked like it could withstand a cannon blast. 2 armed guards stood outside despite the rain, and Ryder could see at least 3 more inside through the windows. 5 guards, he muttered to Eli, plus whoever's working the counters, and that's just what we can see. They walked past without slowing, continuing down the street toward a saloon called the Golden Spur. Inside, they found a corner table and ordered whiskey, watching the room fill up with cattlemen celebrating early or drowning their sorrows over deals gone wrong. Ryder was on his second drink when he heard the name. "Dalton Brothers rode in this morning," a cowboy at the next table was saying to his companion. "Saw them myself, bold as brass, walking right down Main Street like they owned the place. Surprised Webb ain't got a posse together already. Webb's 60 miles north dealing with some horse thieves. Won't be back for days. The Daltons probably planned it that way." Ryder's attention sharpened. He leaned back, making it look casual, and listened. "You think they're here for the auction money?" "What else? $500,000 going to be in that bank come Friday. Daltons would be fools to pass that up." $500,000? Ryder's mind raced. That was more than the Cain gang had taken in their entire career combined. That was the kind of score that built empires, or got you killed trying. He glanced at Eli, who'd been listening too. Their eyes met, and Ryder saw understanding there. Eli knew what he was thinking, knew it was insane, and knew they were going to try anyway. They finished their drinks and left, walking through the rain-soaked streets until they found a cheap boarding house on the edge of town. The landlady was a pinch-faced woman who demanded payment up front but didn't ask for names. Perfect. Their room was barely bigger than a cell, with 2 narrow beds and a window that overlooked an alley. Ryder bolted the door and pulled out the map he'd been carrying, spreading it across one of the beds. "All right," he said. "Let's think this through. The Daltons are planning to hit the bank. That's obvious. They've got numbers, probably 6 or 7 guns. They'll go in hard and fast, take what they can carry, and shoot their way out." Eli nodded, waiting. "Now what if we let them do all the work? Let them hit the bank, deal with the guards, grab the money. Then we hit them." Eli's eyebrows rose. He wrote, "Hit the Daltons." "Why not? They'll be loaded down with cash, probably scattered, definitely not expecting trouble from anyone but the law. We pick our moment, take them by surprise, and ride off with everything they just stole." "That's insane." "You got a better idea?" Eli stared at the words he'd just written, then slowly shook his head. He wrote again. How? That was the question. How did 2 men ambush a gang of experienced outlaws who'd just pulled off the robbery of the decade? The more Ryder thought about it, the more the challenges multiplied. They'd need to know the Daltons' escape route. They'd need the element of surprise. They'd need luck on a scale that bordered on miraculous. But Ryder had never let impossible odds stop him before. "First, we need information," he said. "The Daltons are in town. We find them, watch them, figure out their plan. Then we get ahead of them. For the next 3 days, Ryder and Eli became shadows. They watched the bank, noting the patterns of the guards, the flow of depositors, the routines that governed frontier commerce. They watched the Daltons, too, 6 men who carried themselves with the casual violence of those who'd killed often and expected to kill again. The gang's leader was Clay Dalton, a man in his 30s with cold eyes and a reputation for brutality that made Ryder's old crew look merciful by comparison. His brothers, Jake and Samuel, flanked him like loyal dogs. The other 3 were hired guns, competent but not brilliant, the kind of men who followed orders and collected their share. Ryder observed them in the saloons, watched how they moved through town, noted the way people unconsciously stepped aside when they approached. These were not men to be underestimated. On the 3rd night, Eli returned from a scouting expedition with news. He'd followed Jake Dalton to the livery stable and overheard a conversation with the stable master about horses. Fresh horses, ready to ride hard, wanted for Friday afternoon. The stable master had asked if they were leaving town in a hurry, and Jake had laughed, a sound Eli described in his notes as, like rocks grinding together. Friday afternoon, the day after the auction, when the bank would be fullest. "They're making their move tomorrow," Ryder said, studying his map by candlelight. "Which means we need to be in position tonight." "Where?" "There's only 3 ways out of town fast enough to matter. North toward Webb's jurisdiction. No chance, that's suicide. East through the valley. Possible, but it's open country. No cover. South through the Canyon Pass. Difficult terrain, but it offers concealment and multiple escape routes." Ryder traced the southern route with his finger. "That's where they'll go. That's where we'll be waiting." Eli wrote, "Just us against 6? We won't fight them head on. We'll wait until they're through the pass, probably stopping to divide the money or change horses. They'll be celebrating, relaxed, thinking the hard part's over. That's when we hit them." With what plan? Ryder looked at his partner, this quiet, steady presence who'd become the closest thing to family he'd had in years. "You trust me?" Eli met his eyes, considered for a long moment, then nodded. "Good, because I'm making this up as I go." Despite the grim humor, Ryder meant it. He had the outline of a plan, but so much depended on timing, luck, and variables he couldn't control. It was reckless, maybe suicidal. Exactly the kind of play that either built legends or filled graves. They spent the night preparing. Ryder cleaned his Colt until it gleamed, loaded extra ammunition, checked every piece of gear twice. Eli did the same with his Remington, his movements methodical and calm despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. Just before dawn, as they prepared to ride out, Eli wrote something and handed it to Ryder. "Why are you doing this?" "Really?" Ryder read the question, felt the weight of it. He could have given the easy answer, the money, the reputation, the need to prove himself. But Eli deserved more than easy answers. "When I was 15, Ryder said quietly, "my father died and left me nothing but debts and shame. The town I grew up in, they looked at me like I was already criminal, already worthless. So I became what they expected, built a name through blood and bullets until people feared that name more than anything." He paused, staring at the wall but seeing the past. "Then Dutch took me in, and the gang became my family. We were somebody together. We mattered, but they're gone now, and Webb made sure the world thinks I died with them, like I was nothing without them." His jaw tightened. "I need to prove that's not true, that Ryder Cain is more than just a footnote in someone else's story." Eli listened, then wrote, "And after? When everyone knows your name again?" Ryder had no answer for that. He'd never thought beyond the proving, beyond the moment when the frontier would have to acknowledge he was still alive, still dangerous, still somebody who mattered. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I figure we'll work it out together." Eli smiled slightly, folded his paper, and checked his gun one more time. They rode out of Silver Point in the pre-dawn darkness, heading south toward the Canyon Pass. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and sharp with the smell of wet sage. Stars still showed overhead, fading as the eastern horizon began to lighten. The Canyon Pass was a narrow defile carved by ancient water through red rock walls that rose 50 feet on either side. The trail through it wound like a snake, offering plenty of places for ambush, but also making it impossible to see what waited around each bend. Ryder had scouted it 2 days earlier and found what he was looking for, a widening about 2 miles in where the walls pulled back to form a natural arena, a place where riders would naturally stop to rest and reorganize. That's where they would wait. They positioned themselves in the rocks above the trail, with clear views of both approaches and good cover. Ryder settled in with his Winchester rifle, while Eli kept watch with binoculars Ryder had stolen from a hunter's camp. The sun climbed, burning off the morning cool, and they waited. Hours passed. Ryder dozed in shifts, trusting Eli to wake him if anything moved. The silence of the canyon was absolute except for the occasional cry of a hawk wheeling overhead. Then, around 2 in the afternoon, Eli touched his shoulder and pointed. Distant sound carried strangely in the canyon, but Ryder could hear it now. Gunfire. A lot of it. Rapid, overlapping shots that spoke of a battle, not a slaughter. The Daltons were meeting resistance. Sounds like the bank guards put up a fight, Ryder muttered. Good. Means the gang will be rattled, maybe wounded. Easier to handle. They waited, weapons ready, every sense alert. The sound of hoofbeats came first, echoing off the canyon walls. Then riders appeared around the bend, 6 men riding hard, saddlebags bulging, faces grim with the aftermath of violence. Ryder recognized Clay Dalton in the lead, his shirt darkened with what might have been blood. The gang slowed as they reached the widening, exactly as Ryder had predicted. Clay raised a hand, bringing them to a halt. The horses were lathered and heaving, pushed hard. Time for a breather, a moment to check their take and confirm everyone was still breathing. Perfect. Jake, Samuel, check the bags, Clay ordered, his voice carrying clearly in the canyon. Make sure we got it all. Rest of you keep watch. Anyone coming up that trail, you shoot first. The gang dismounted, stretching and cursing, the tension of the robbery starting to ease now that they were clear of town. Ryder watched them through his rifle sights, counting seconds, waiting for the right moment. One of the hired guns pulled out a bottle of whiskey and took a long pull. Another was laughing about something, the sound harsh and relieved. Jake and Samuel opened the saddlebags, pulling out wrapped bundles of cash that made even Ryder's breath catch. That much money in one place seemed almost obscene. Clay was the only one still fully alert, scanning the canyon walls with the wariness of a man who'd survived this long by trusting his instincts. Ryder saw him stiffen, saw his hand drift toward his gun. Too late. Ryder fired. His first shot took the man with the whiskey bottle through the shoulder, spinning him around and sending the bottle exploding against the rocks. Before the sound even registered, Ryder worked the Winchester's lever and fired again, catching another hired gun in the leg. Eli opened up with his Remington from his position 30 feet away, his shots forcing the gang to scatter, not trying to kill, not yet, just creating chaos, making them panic, driving them toward cover that would separate them. It worked better than Ryder had dared hope. The Daltons dove for different positions, shouting at each other, trying to locate their attackers in the rocks above. One of them fired blindly upward, the bullet ricocheting off stone 20 feet from Ryder's position. Up there, Clay shouted. In the rocks, spread out and flank them. But spreading out was exactly what Ryder wanted. The gang was no longer a unified force, but 6 individuals trying to survive, their stolen money forgotten for the moment. Ryder shifted position, moving along the rocks with practiced silence. Below him, Samuel Dalton was climbing up, gun drawn, trying to work around a Ryder's flank. The outlaw was good, careful, quiet, deadly. But he was also predictable. Ryder let him get within 10 feet, let him think he'd successfully flanked his target. Then he stood up, his Colt appearing in his hand. Don't, Ryder said quietly. Samuel froze, his gun half raised, his eyes going wide as he recognized who stood before him. You're dead. They said you were dead. They say a lot of things. Ryder's gun never wavered. Drop it. For a moment, Ryder thought Samuel might try it anyway. Might go for the impossible shot that could turn the tables, but whatever the outlaw saw in Ryder's eyes convinced him otherwise. He dropped his gun and raised his hands. Smart choice. Now call your brother off before my partner kills him. Samuel hesitated, then shouted, Clay, we're done. They got us cold. Silence fell over the canyon. Ryder could feel the other men calculating, weighing their options. Then Clay's voice came from somewhere below. Show yourselves. Let's talk this through like professionals. Ryder almost laughed at that. Professionals. As if robbery and murder were just another trade. Eli, he called. "You clear?" A single shot rang out, Eli's signal that he had a clear line on at least one more gang member. "All right, Clay," Ryder shouted. "Here's how this works. You and your boys step away from those saddlebags, keep your hands where I can see them, and maybe you live through this. Try anything clever, and my partner puts bullets in everyone he can see." "And then what? You take the money and ride off?" "That's the general idea." A long pause. Then, "Who are you?" Ryder smiled, feeling the moment crystallize into something perfect. This was it. This was the statement he'd been waiting to make. "Name's Ryder Cain, and I'm taking back what's mine." He heard the sharp intake of breath, the muttered curses as the name registered. "Good. Let them know. Let them fear." One by one, the Daltons and their hired guns emerged from cover, hands raised, faces tight with fury and disbelief. Ryder kept Samuel in front of him as a shield, his gun ready, while Eli descended from his position to cover the others. Clay Dalton was the last to show himself, his cold eyes locked on Ryder, with an expression somewhere between respect and rage. "Cain, heard you were dead." "Heard that myself. Turned out to be premature." "This is a mistake. You know who you're robbing?" "6 fools who just did all my work for me?" Ryder gestured with his gun toward the horses. "Eli, check those bags. Make sure it's all there." Eli moved carefully, always keeping the gang in his peripheral vision, and opened the saddlebags. Even from a distance, Ryder could see his partner's eyes widen at the sheer amount of cash packed into those leather pouches. Eli looked up and nodded. "All there." "Beautiful," Ryder said. "Now, gentlemen, you're going to walk north, slowly, while my partner and I collect our winnings. You'll have every lawman and bounty hunter in 3 territories hunting you," Clay said. "That money's marked. They'll know where it came from." "Let them know. Let everyone know." Ryder's smile was sharp as broken glass. "That's the whole point." For a moment he thought Clay might rush him anyway, might decide death was preferable to this humiliation. But professionalism won out, or maybe just survival instinct. Clay nodded to his men, and they began walking north, their hands still raised, their weapons left behind in the dust. Ryder and Eli waited until they were out of sight before moving. Then they worked fast, transferring the saddlebags to their own horses, gathering the dropped weapons, erasing any sign of their presence. The money was heavier than Ryder expected. Bundles of bills, leather pouches of gold coins, a fortune that represented years of work for most men. They'd just stolen it in less than 10 minutes. As they mounted up, Eli wrote quickly, "They'll come after us." "I'm counting on it." Ryder secured the last saddlebag and checked his weapons. Every outlaw, every lawman, every newspaper reporter looking for a story, they'll all be hunting Ryder Cain, and when they find me, they'll remember exactly why they feared that name. They rode south, deeper into the canyon, following a route Ryder had scouted that would take them through country too rough for easy pursuit. Behind them, the Dalton brothers would be reorganizing, reclaiming their weapons, plotting revenge. Let them. Revenge required finding you first, and Ryder had learned over 10 years how to disappear when necessary. What he hadn't learned, what he was still figuring out, was what came after the disappearing, after the victory, after the frontier knew his name again. But for now, riding through the Crimson Canyon with a fortune in stolen money and the only partner he'd ever truly trusted at his side, those questions could wait. The sun was setting when they finally emerged from the southern end of the canyon, painting the desert ahead in shades of gold and amber. They paused on a ridge overlooking emptiness that stretched to the horizon. "You ever think about what we'll do with all this money?" Ryder asked. Eli considered, then wrote, "Buy something that lasts." "Like what?" A shrug. "Land, maybe. Place where no one hunts us." Ryder thought about that. A place of their own, somewhere to stop running. It sounded impossible, a dream for other men. But then again, so had robbing the Dalton brothers, and they'd just done that. "Maybe," he said. "But first we got to survive what comes next." They rode on into the gathering darkness. 2 outlaws carrying the weight of a territory's rage and fear, bound together by choice and circumstance, heading toward a horizon that held either glory or graves. The frontier would remember their names now. The question was whether they'd live long enough to enjoy it. The news traveled faster than they did. By the time Ryder and Eli reached the scattered settlement of Mesquite Flats, 3 days hard riding from the canyon, the story had already arrived. Ryder heard it first from a drunk cowboy stumbling out of a saloon, shouting to anyone who'd listen about the audacious robbery in Silver Point. $500,000 gone like smoke! And you know who took it? The cowboy swayed, grabbing a hitching post for balance. Ryder Cain, the ghost himself, walked right up to the Dalton gang and took everything they stole. Left them standing there like fools with their thumbs up there. Ryder kept walking, hat pulled low, but he couldn't suppress the slight smile tugging at his mouth. The story was already growing in the telling, becoming something larger than the truth. By next week, he'd probably be credited with single-handedly defeating a dozen outlaws. By next month, the tale would be completely unrecognizable. But that was fine. Legend didn't require accuracy. It required impact. They found a boarding house run by a Mexican widow who asked no questions and accepted payment in gold coins without comment. The room she gave them was clean and quiet, with a view of the western desert where the sun was beginning its descent. Ryder locked the door and pulled the saddlebags from his shoulder, dumping them on the bed. The money spilled out in a cascade of bills and coin pouches, more wealth than he'd ever touched at one time. For a moment, he just stared at it, feeling the weight of what they'd done settle into his bones. Eli moved to the window, watching the street below with the careful attention that had become his nature. After a moment, he wrote, "How long do we stay?" "Not long. Just enough to rest the horses and figure out our next move." Ryder began counting the money, organizing it into stacks. "They'll be looking for us. Webb, the Daltons, every bounty hunter who thinks they can collect the reward." "What reward?" "The one they'll post as soon as word gets out. 10,000, probably. Maybe more after this." Ryder paused in his counting, looking at the mountain of stolen money. "Question is, what do we do with all this? Can't exactly deposit it in a bank." Eli turned from the window, his expression thoughtful. He wrote for a long time before showing Ryder the paper. "We could leave. Go to Mexico or California. Change our names. Start over." Ryder read it twice, feeling something twist in his chest. It was the smart play, the survival play. Take the money and disappear into obscurity. Let the legend fade. Live out their days as nobody in particular. Everything in him recoiled from the idea. "I didn't do this to run away," he said quietly. "I did it to prove I'm still somebody, that I matter." "But you proved it. Everyone knows your name now. Knowing and remembering are different things. The frontier's got a short memory. Give it 6 months and they'll forget again. I'll be a story old men tell in saloons, nothing more." He stood pacing the small room. "I need something permanent, something that cements my name in frontier history." Eli watched him with those old, knowing eyes. Then he wrote, "Or something that gets you killed." "Maybe, but I'd rather die as somebody than live as nobody." Ryder stopped pacing, met his partner's gaze. "You don't have to stay. You've earned your share of this money. You could take it and do whatever you want. Buy that land you mentioned. Live quiet." For a long moment, Eli just looked at him. Then very deliberately, he tore the paper with his suggestion about leaving into small pieces and let them fall to the floor. He wrote fresh words. "Where you go, I go." Something fierce and grateful surged in Ryder's chest. He'd never had loyalty like this, not even in the gang. Dutch and the others had been partners of convenience, held together by profit and fear. But Eli stayed because he chose to, because something in their partnership mattered more than safety or sense. "All right," Ryder said. "Then we do this together, all the way." They spent that night planning, spreading a map across the bed, and discussing options in their strange combination of spoken words and written notes. Ryder wanted another big score, something even more audacious than the Silver Point job. But Eli kept pointing to a problem Ryder didn't want to acknowledge. Every lawman in 3 territories would be watching for them now. The element of surprise was gone. "That's why we do the opposite of what they expect," Ryder argued. "They'll be watching the banks, the payroll offices, the big targets. So we hit something personal, something that sends a message." "Like what?" Ryder's finger traced a route on the map, stopping at a town in northern Colorado. "Like Marcus Webb's own backyard." Eli's eyebrows shot up. He wrote, "You want to rob the sheriff." "Not rob, embarrass. Make him look like the fraud he is." Ryder's smile was cold. Webb built his reputation claiming he killed the Cain gang. Time to show the frontier what a liar he is. The idea crystallized as he spoke. Webb had made himself famous by pretending to bring down Ryder Cain. The newspapers had printed his statements, politicians had praised his service, and the man had probably positioned himself for higher office on the strength of that lie. Destroying that reputation would hurt Webb worse than stealing his money. It took them 2 days to reach the outskirts of Redemption Creek, the town where Webb had displayed the bodies and claimed his victory. Ryder approached it with a mixture of rage and calculation, remembering how it felt to read his own death notice in the newspaper. They made camp in the hills overlooking town and spent a full day just watching. Webb's office sat prominently on Main Street, a symbol of law and order. The sheriff himself appeared regularly, walking the streets with the confident swagger of a man who believed his own legend. "There," Ryder said, pointing through the binoculars. "That's the bastard who tried to bury me." Eli took the binoculars, studying Webb with the same careful attention he gave everything. After a moment, he wrote, "He has 6 deputies. Town is full of people. This is different from the canyon." "I know. We're not robbing anything. We're delivering a message." Ryder had been working on the plan since they'd left Mesquite Flats, refining it in his mind. "Tonight, we're going to paint this town red with the truth." The execution was simpler than the Silver Point job, but required perfect timing. They waited until 3 in the morning when Redemption Creek slept, and only one deputy kept watch at the jail. Ryder and Eli moved through the darkness like ghosts, carrying buckets of paint they'd mixed themselves from supplies stolen from a freight wagon. The first place they hit was the front of Webb's office. In letters 3 feet high, Ryder painted, "Webb is a liar. Ryder Cain lives." They moved quickly to the bank, the general store, the newspaper office. Each building received its message, each declaration a blow to Webb's credibility. Eli kept watch while Ryder painted, his Remington ready for the first sign of trouble. The last building was the saloon where Webb apparently spent most afternoons holding court, telling stories of his supposed victory over the Cain gang. On its front wall, Ryder painted the most damning message of all. Ask Webb about the real bodies. Ask him who really died. They were finishing when a door opened down the street. The deputy on night watch emerged, yawning, probably making his rounds. Ryder and Eli pressed into the shadows, barely breathing, while the man walked past within 10 feet of them. The deputy paused, squinting at the fresh paint on the saloon wall. Even in the darkness, the white letters were visible. He stepped closer, reading, and Ryder saw the exact moment comprehension hit. The deputy's hand went to his gun, his head swiveling, searching the darkness. "Who's out there? Show yourself!" Ryder had already told Eli they wouldn't kill anyone tonight unless absolutely necessary. This wasn't about violence, it was about humiliation. But that didn't mean they'd let themselves get caught. He picked up a rock and threw it hard, sending it clattering against the far side of the street. The deputy spun toward the sound, gun drawn, and in that moment of distraction, Ryder and Eli slipped away into the alley behind the saloon. They heard the deputies shout, calling for help, and then the town began waking up. Lights appeared in windows, doors opened, voices raised in confusion and alarm. By the time the first citizens reached Main Street to see what the commotion was about, Ryder and Eli were already on their horses, riding hard into the darkness beyond town limits. Behind them, Redemption Creek erupted into chaos. Ryder could imagine Webb being roused from sleep, stumbling into the street to find his lies painted across every important building in town. The sheriff's face turning red with rage and embarrassment, the whispers starting, the doubt spreading, the questions Webb wouldn't be able to answer without admitting he'd lied about killing Ryder Cain. It was beautiful. They rode until dawn before stopping to rest, putting 20 miles between themselves and Redemption Creek. As the sun rose, painting the desert in shades of copper and gold, Eli pulled out his paper and wrote, "That felt good." Ryder laughed, surprised by how much he agreed. The money had been satisfying, the victory over the Daltons had been sweet, but this public humiliation of the man who'd tried to erase him, felt like justice. "Yeah," he said, "it did." But satisfaction was a luxury they couldn't afford for long. That afternoon, as they watered their horses at a creek, a rider approached from the east. Ryder's hand went to his gun, but the rider kept his hands visible and called out from a distance, Easy, friend. Just passing through. Got news you might want to hear. The rider was a young man, maybe 18, with the eager face of someone who saw adventure everywhere. He pulled up at a respectful distance, his eyes going wide as he took in Ryder's weathered features and the guns at his hip. You're him, ain't you? Ryder Cain? Ryder didn't confirm or deny, just waited. Figured. You got that look about you. The young man grinned. Whole territory's talking about what you did in Redemption Creek. Webb's offering $20,000 for your capture. Says you're a dangerous criminal who needs to be stopped. 20,000, Ryder repeated. That's a lot of money. Sure is. But between you and me? The kid leaned forward conspiratorially. Most folks think what you did was hilarious. Webb's been strutting around for weeks, claiming he's some kind of hero. About time someone knocked him down a peg. Eli wrote, "Why are you telling us this?" The kid read the note, then looked at Eli with interest. You're the quiet one they're talking about. The partner. He turned back to Ryder. I'm telling you because I'm hoping you'll let me ride with you. I can shoot, I know the country, and I'm tired of breaking my back on a ranch for $2 a week. No, Ryder said immediately. But I said no. This life. Ryder gestured at the empty land around them. It's not adventure. It's survival. And most people who choose it end up dead before they're 25. Go home, kid. Live a long, boring life. The young man's face fell, but he nodded slowly. Yes, sir. I understand. He started to turn his horse, then paused. For what it's worth, you're a legend already. People tell stories about you like you're something out of a dime novel. After he rode away, Eli wrote, He's right. You're famous now. Famous is another word for hunted. But Ryder couldn't deny the truth in it. He'd wanted to be remembered, wanted to matter. He'd achieved that. The question now was what came next. The answer arrived 3 days later in the form of a letter delivered to a post office in a town called Bitter Springs. The clerk had been holding it for days, addressed simply to Ryder Cain, wherever he may be found. Somehow, impossibly, it had reached him. Ryder opened it in their room at another anonymous boarding house, Eli reading over his shoulder. The handwriting was educated, precise. Mr. Cain, it read, My name is irrelevant, but my proposition is not. I represent certain business interests who would benefit from your particular talents. If you're interested in a job that would make the Silver Point robbery look like pocket change, meet me at the Crossroads Hotel in Junction City on the 15th. Come alone or with your partner. Your choice. But come unarmed as a show of good faith. We are not your enemies. We are potential allies who can offer you something more valuable than money. Legitimacy. The letter was unsigned. Ryder read it 3 times, his mind racing. This was either an elaborate trap or an opportunity unlike anything he'd imagined. Legitimacy. The word stuck with him. What did that even mean for someone like him? What do you think? He asked Eli. His partner took the letter, studied it carefully, then wrote, Trap, probably. But maybe not. Still stupid to walk into. Everything we've done has been stupid. Ryder took the letter back, staring at those words. Legitimacy. But what if it's real? What if there's a way to be somebody without spending the rest of my life running? Eli's expression was skeptical, but he wrote, Your choice. I'll follow. The 15th was 4 days away. 4 days to decide whether to walk into what might be a trap or to keep running, keep robbing, keep building a legend that would probably get him killed before he turned 30. Ryder made his decision that night, staring at the ceiling while Eli slept. He'd spent 10 years surviving on instinct and violence. Maybe it was time to try something different. Maybe legitimacy, whatever that meant, was worth the risk. They arrived in Junction City on the morning of the 15th. The town was larger than most they'd visited, with actual paved streets and buildings that looked permanent. The Crossroads Hotel dominated the center square, 3 stories of brick and glass that spoke of money and civilization. Feels wrong, Ryder muttered as they approached. Too open, too many witnesses. Eli nodded his agreement, but didn't try to stop him. They left their guns with the hotel clerk as instructed, a surrender that made Ryder's skin crawl. Unarmed in hostile territory went against every survival instinct he possessed, but he'd come this far, might as well see it through. The clerk directed them to the 3rd floor, room 12. Ryder climbed the stairs with Eli at his side, his senses screaming warnings. Every shadow could hide a gunman. Every closed door could burst open with violence. But nothing happened. Room 12's door was unlocked. Ryder pushed it open slowly, ready to dive aside if bullets started flying. Instead, he found a well-appointed suite with a table set for 3. A man sat in one of the chairs, middle-aged, expensively dressed, with the soft hands of someone who'd never done hard labor. He stood as they entered, extending his hand. "Mr. Cain, thank you for coming. My name is Harrison Drake. Please, sit." Ryder ignored the hand, but took a chair, positioning himself where he could watch the door. Eli remained standing, his eyes never leaving Drake. "You're not armed," Ryder observed. "Neither are you, as requested, a mutual gesture of trust." Drake poured 3 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter. "Though I suspect your partner could kill me with his bare hands if needed." "Faster than you'd think," Ryder agreed. "So let's skip the pleasantries. What do you want?" Drake smiled, settling into his chair with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. "I represent a consortium of businessmen, mine owners, railroad magnates, cattle barons, men who've built empires in the territories but struggle with certain obstacles." "What kind of obstacles?" "The kind that can't be solved through legal channels. Claim jumpers who refuse to move, rival operations that need to be convinced to sell, labor organizers stirring up trouble." Drake sipped his whiskey. "We need someone with your particular skills, someone who can handle problems discreetly and effectively." Ryder laughed, the sound bitter. "You want me to be your hired thug. I want to offer you employment, steady work at substantial pay, protection from the law. We have influence with sheriffs and judges across 3 territories, and most importantly, a chance to build something lasting instead of just surviving day to day." "In exchange for what?" "Becoming your attack dog. In exchange for using your talents in service of progress. The frontier is being tamed, Mr. Cain. Soon there won't be room for independent outlaws like yourself. You can either adapt or be swept aside." Drake leaned forward. "We're offering you the chance to be on the winning side of history." Eli had been listening quietly, but now he moved to the table and wrote, "Sounds like slavery with better pay." Drake read the note and smiled thinly. "Call it what you like, but consider your alternatives. Right now you have $20,000 on your head. Every lawman, bounty hunter, and desperate fool with a gun is looking for you. How long can you survive that? A year, 2? Eventually, someone will get lucky. And working for you changes that how. We make the bounty disappear. We ensure the law looks the other way. You'd be free to live openly, build a real life, without constantly watching over your shoulder." Drake pulled out a ledger and opened it. "Here's our initial offer, $5,000 a month, plus bonuses for completed jobs, housing provided. Your partner, of course, would receive the same. $5,000 a month. $60,000 a year. More money than Ryder had stolen in his entire outlaw career, offered as steady income. It was tempting in a way that terrified him. "And if I refuse?" "Then we part as friends, and you continue your current path. Though I should mention that several of our consortium members have connections to the Dalton brothers. It would be unfortunate if they learned your location." There it was, the threat wrapped in silk. Accept their offer or face the consequences. Ryder stood, his chair scraping back. "I need time to think about this." "Of course, but not too much time. Our offer expires in 72 hours. Drake stood as well, extending his hand again. "Think carefully, Mr. Cain. This may be the only path that doesn't end with you bleeding out in some nameless gulch." They left the hotel without their answer, reclaiming their guns and walking into the afternoon sun. Ryder felt sick, his mind churning with possibilities and fears. Everything Drake said made sense. The frontier was changing. The days of independent outlaws were numbered. Adaptation or extinction. But working for men like Drake meant surrendering the very thing Ryder had fought so hard to reclaim: his autonomy, his legend, his self. They found a quiet spot by a creek outside town and sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Eli wrote, "What do you want to do?" "I don't know," Ryder admitted. "Part of me wants to tell Drake to go to hell, but another part knows he's right. This can't last forever." Nothing lasts forever. So what? We just keep running until we get killed? Eli thought for a long moment, then wrote carefully. We could do something different, not Drake's way, our way. What's our way? One big score, something so large we never need to work again. Then disappear for real. New names, new lives. Ryder considered this. One final job, massive enough to set them up forever, then vanish into obscurity, not as nobodies but as legends who chose to walk away. There was a certain poetry to it. You know what that would take? What we'd have to steal? Tell me. More than what we took from the Daltons, more than anything anyone's ever stolen in frontier history. We'd need a target so rich, so impossible, that just attempting it would be insane. Eli smiled and wrote, Sounds perfect. Despite everything, Ryder found himself grinning. This was why they worked together. Eli understood him in ways no one else ever had. Understood that Ryder needed to go out big, or not at all. All right, Ryder said. We've got 72 hours before Drake's offer expires. Let's use them to find our impossible target. They spent the next 3 days in Junction City's library, poring over newspapers and railroad schedules, looking for opportunity. Eli turned out to have a gift for pattern recognition, spotting details Ryder would have missed. Together, they built a picture of money moving through the territory, payrolls, bank transfers, cattle payments, mining revenues. And then Eli found it. He showed Ryder an article about a railroad expansion. The Union Mountain Railway was completing a new line through the Rockies, connecting Denver to the Northern Territories. To celebrate the completion, they were running a special inaugural journey carrying railroad executives, investors, and most importantly, a substantial gold shipment meant to fund operations in the new territories. The article estimated the shipment at over $200,000 in gold bullion. All of it on one train, traveling through remote mountain passes, lightly guarded because no one would expect anyone to be crazy enough to rob a moving train. There, Ryder said, tapping the article. That's our impossible target. Eli wrote, How do we stop a train? Carefully. Ryder was already thinking through logistics, mentally mapping the route. We'd need to hit it in the mountains, where it has to slow down for the grades. We'd need explosives to take out the tracks. And we'd need perfect timing. Just us two? Has to be. Anyone else is a liability. Ryder looked at his partner. This is everything we talked about. Big enough to set us up forever. Crazy enough to cement our legend. And impossible enough that no one will ever forget our names. When? Ryder checked the article's date. The inaugural run is in 5 days, which means we have exactly that long to plan the biggest robbery in frontier history. For the first time since receiving Drake's offer, Ryder felt the crushing weight of impossible choices lift from his shoulders. This was clarity. This was purpose. One last job, perfectly executed, and then freedom on their own terms. They left Junction City that afternoon without answering Drake's proposition. Let the businessman wonder. Let him make his threats. None of it mattered anymore. Ryder Cain was going to rob a train, and the entire frontier would remember exactly what that name meant. The mountains rose like jagged teeth against the sky, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat baking the valleys below. Ryder stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking the railroad tracks that wound through Eagle Pass, studying the terrain with the focused intensity of a predator selecting the perfect ambush point. 5 days to plan the impossible. They'd already burned through 3 of them. Eli appeared beside him, breathing hard from the climb, carrying surveying equipment they'd stolen from a railroad camp 2 nights earlier. He set down the theodolite and wiped sweat from his forehead, then wrote, "This is the spot." Ryder had to agree. The tracks curved sharply here, following the natural contours of the mountain. Trains would have to slow to a crawl to navigate the bend safely. Better still, the pass was isolated. No towns for 20 miles in either direction. No witnesses except the eagles circling overhead. "We blow the tracks here," Ryder said, pointing to the curve's apex. "Train stops or derails. Either way, it can't go forward. Then we hit them fast before they organize." "How many guards?" Article said the railroad was keeping security light to avoid attracting attention. Probably 4 or 5 armed men, maybe a few more. Against 2 of us. Ryder smiled grimly. "I've faced worse odds. Never robbed a train before. Neither has anyone else we're competing with. That's what makes it perfect." Ryder moved along the cliff edge, visualizing the attack. We set the charges at night. Time them to blow when the train reaches the curve. The explosion will panic everyone. We come in from both sides. You take the rear cars, I'll take the front. Get to the gold shipment before they can mount a defense. Eli wrote, and then? Then we load as much as we can carry onto the horses and disappear into the mountains. They'll pursue, but we know this country better than any railroad executive. By the time they organize a proper search, we'll be 50 miles away with new identities. If everything goes perfectly. When has anything ever gone perfectly? Ryder turned to face his partner. This is it, Eli. This is the job that either makes us legends forever or kills us trying. You having second thoughts? Eli looked at him for a long moment, those old eyes holding depths of understanding that words could never capture. Then he shook his head and wrote, no second thoughts. Just want to survive. That makes two of us. They spent the rest of that day preparing. Ryder had purchased dynamite from a mining camp, trading 3 gold coins and a fabricated story about needing to clear boulders from a claim. The explosive was old, unstable, exactly the kind of material that could blow them to pieces if handled carelessly. But it was all they could get on short notice. Eli proved surprisingly adept at constructing the charges, his steady hands and careful attention to detail making up for his lack of experience. They built 3 separate bundles, each with enough explosive force to tear through railroad ties and bend steel rails. Ryder watched him work and felt a surge of gratitude that this quiet, competent man had chosen to ride beside him. You ever wonder what you'd be doing if we hadn't met? Ryder asked. Eli paused in his work, considered the question, then wrote, probably dead, or wishing I was. That bad? Drifting is slow dying. You gave me something to live for. The words hit Ryder harder than he expected. He'd been so focused on his own needs, his reputation, his legend, his pride, that he hadn't fully considered what this partnership meant to Eli. Not just survival, but purpose. Not just existing, but mattering. After this job, Ryder said quietly, we'll have enough money to do whatever we want. You could buy that land you mentioned. Build something that lasts. What will you do? Ryder had avoided thinking about that question, but now he forced himself to face it. What did he want beyond the legend, beyond the moment when everyone knew his name? I don't know, he admitted. Never thought I'd live long enough to have choices. Maybe that's the problem. Before Ryder could respond, a sound echoed through the pass, distant but unmistakable. Hoofbeats. Multiple riders moving fast. They scrambled for cover, grabbing their weapons and the half-assembled explosives. From behind a boulder, Ryder counted the approaching riders. 6 men, well-armed, moving with the purposeful coordination of a hunting party. Bounty hunters. Had to be. Stay quiet, Ryder whispered. Let them pass. But the riders didn't pass. They slowed as they reached the curve in the tracks, their leader raising a hand to halt the group. He was a big man with a scarred face and the kind of eyes that had seen too much killing. This is it, the leader announced. This is where they'll hit the train. Ryder's blood went cold. Somehow, impossibly, someone else had figured out their plan. One of the other riders, younger and nervous, asked, How do you know, Cain? Because it's what I do. Perfect spot for an ambush. Train has to slow down, can't maneuver, nowhere to run. Cain dismounted, studying the tracks with professional interest. Cain's smart. He'll set charges, blow the rails, hit them in the confusion. So what do? We wait. Let Cain do all the work robbing the train, then we take everything from him, just like he did to the Daltons. Cain's laugh was harsh as grinding stone. Poetic justice, wouldn't you say? The bounty hunters made camp right there on the tracks, settling in with the patience of men accustomed to long waits. Ryder watched them from his hiding spot, his mind racing through options. They couldn't attack 6 armed men and expect to survive. They couldn't move the ambush location. This was the only viable spot for miles. And they couldn't abandon the plan entirely, not when they'd come this far. Eli touched his shoulder and showed him a note. What now? Ryder thought hard, studying the bounty hunter's camp, calculating angles and possibilities. Then an idea began forming, dangerous, audacious, perfectly insane. We let them wait, he whispered, but we changed the plan. Instead of blowing the tracks during the robbery, we blow them after." Eli's eyes widened with understanding. He wrote, "Use the train to escape?" "Exactly. We board before it reaches the pass, get to the gold, and have it ready to unload. When the train slows for the curve, we take what we can carry and jump. Then we blow the charges behind us, blocking pursuit. Cain and his men will be stuck on the wrong side of the explosion." "What about the horses?" "We leave them. Can't board a moving train with horses anyway." Ryder was working through the logistics as he spoke. "We'll need to jump onto the train further down the line before it reaches the mountains. That means timing it perfectly. And if we miss? Then we get run over by several tons of steel and die ugly. But we were probably going to die anyway, so what's the difference?" Despite the gravity of their situation, Eli smiled slightly and wrote, "When you put it that way." They waited until nightfall, moving with agonizing slowness away from the bounty hunter's camp. Every snapped twig, every displaced stone sounded impossibly loud in the mountain silence. But Cain's men were focused on the tracks ahead, confident in their trap, and didn't notice two shadows slipping away into the darkness. By dawn, Ryder and Eli had repositioned themselves 15 miles down the line, at a point where the tracks ran through relatively flat terrain. The train would be moving at full speed here, which made boarding it suicidal. But Ryder had learned long ago that the difference between bravery and suicide was often just a matter of success. They spent the day watching the rails, timing the passage of freight trains, calculating speeds and distances. The inaugural run was scheduled to pass through at 2 in the afternoon, which gave them one shot to get it right. "The trick," Ryder explained, mounting his horse, "is to match the train's speed before you jump. You ride alongside, get as close as you can, then leap for the ladder on the side of the car. Miss, and the wheels turn you into meat." Eli wrote, "You've done this before?" "Once. Nearly killed me, but I was drunk at the time, so this should go better." "That's not reassuring." "Nothing about this is reassuring. That's what makes it fun." At 1:30, they heard the distant whistle. The inaugural train was coming right on schedule. Ryder and Eli mounted up, positioning themselves parallel to the tracks, hidden in a stand of cottonwoods. The train appeared around the bend, a massive locomotive pulling 6 cars, smoke billowing from its stack, the whole thing moving with the inexorable power of modern industry. Ryder felt his heart hammering against his ribs. This was it. The moment where they either became legends or became corpses. "Now!" he shouted, spurring his horse forward. They burst from the trees, racing alongside the tracks, their horses straining to match the train's speed. Wind tore at Ryder's face, carrying cinders and smoke. The ground blurred beneath him. "Too fast," his mind screamed. "This is too fast!" But he'd committed now. The locomotive thundered past, then the coal car, then the first passenger car. Ryder pulled alongside it, saw the ladder mounted on the car's side, calculated the distance. Impossible. But everything was impossible until someone did it. He stood in his stirrups, released the reins, and jumped. For one terrifying moment, he was suspended in the air with nothing but speed and momentum keeping him alive. Then his hands caught the ladder, his body slammed against the car's side hard enough to knock the breath from his lungs, and his feet scrabbled for purchase on the lower rungs. He'd made it. Looking back, he saw Eli make the same desperate leap, watching his partner fly through the air and catch the ladder on the second car. Relief flooded through him. They were both on the train. Phase 1 complete. Now came the hard part. Ryder climbed to the roof of the car, staying low to avoid being seen from the windows below. The wind up here was brutal, threatening to tear him off and send him tumbling to his death. He moved carefully toward the front of the train, knowing that the gold shipment would be in a special car near the locomotive, the most secure position. Behind him, Eli was doing the same, moving with the careful precision that characterized everything he did. They'd planned to meet at the gold car and breach it together, but Ryder hadn't counted on one variable. Guards on the roof. 2 men appeared ahead of him, railroad security armed with rifles. They spotted him instantly, their weapons coming up. "Stop right there!" Ryder's hand went to his Colt, but drawing on a moving train while crouched on a roof was a recipe for disaster. Instead, he did something they weren't expecting. He charged. The first guard fired, the bullet whining past Ryder's ear, but firing accurately while the train swayed and rocked was nearly impossible. Ryder closed the distance in seconds, tackling the man and sending both of them sliding across the roof toward the edge. They grappled, rolling, each trying to gain advantage while the train rushed beneath them at deadly speed. Ryder got his hands around the guard's rifle, wrenched it away, and used the momentum to throw the man toward the center of the roof. The guard hit hard, stunned, giving Ryder time to turn toward the second man. But the second guard wasn't focused on Ryder anymore. He was aiming at Eli, who'd appeared on the adjacent car. "Eli, down!" The rifle cracked. Eli dove flat as the bullet tore through the air where his head had been. Then he was moving, drawing his Remington with surprising speed for someone balanced on a moving train, returning fire. His first shot went wide. His second caught the guard in the shoulder, spinning him around. The man's rifle flew from his hands, clattering across the roof and disappearing over the edge. The wounded guard clutched his shoulder, his face pale with shock and pain. "You're insane," he gasped. "Both of you. You'll never get away with this." "Probably not," Ryder agreed, retrieving the first guard's rifle. "But we're going to try anyway." He used the rifle butt to knock the wounded man unconscious, then did the same to the first guard. No killing unless absolutely necessary. These men were just doing their jobs. Eli reached him, breathing hard, his eyes bright with the same reckless energy Ryder felt coursing through his own veins. He wrote quickly, "Gold car is ahead, locked." "Then we unlock it." They moved forward, reaching a car that was visibly different from the passenger compartments. Reinforced walls, a heavy door with multiple locks, barred windows too small for a man to fit through. The railroad had built this car specifically to transport valuables, which meant getting inside wouldn't be easy. Ryder climbed down to the coupling between cars, with Eli providing cover from above. The door had 3 separate locks, each requiring a different key. They didn't have keys. What they had was dynamite. "This is going to be loud," Ryder called up to Eli. "And probably stupid, but I'm out of smart ideas." He placed a small charge against the door's lock mechanism, used a short fuse, and scrambled back to a safe distance. The explosion when it came was muffled by the train's noise, but still loud enough to turn heads in the passenger cars. The door hung askew, its locks destroyed. Ryder kicked it open and entered the gold car. Inside, stacked along both walls, were wooden crates marked with the railroad seal. Ryder pried one open and found himself staring at gold bars, each one stamped with official markings, each one worth more than most men earned in a lifetime. Eli appeared in the doorway, his eyes widening at the sheer amount of wealth contained in this single car. "We can't carry it all," Ryder said, already doing the math. "Even if we could, it's too heavy. We take what we can physically manage and leave the rest." They worked fast, selecting the smallest gold bars they could find, stuffing them into canvas bags they'd brought for exactly this purpose. Each bar weighed several pounds, and Ryder could feel his muscles straining as he loaded his bag. Too much more and he wouldn't be able to move, let alone run. Behind them, commotion erupted in the passenger cars, shouting, the sound of doors opening, men organizing. The railroad executives had realized something was wrong. "Time to go," Ryder said, slinging his bag over his shoulder. The weight nearly staggered him. Eli had packed his own bag, though slightly lighter than Ryder's. He wrote, "How do we get off?" "Same way we got on, only in reverse." They climbed back onto the roof, now burdened with gold, just as armed men began pouring from the passenger cars. Shots rang out, bullets sparking off the metal roof. Ryder returned fire, not trying to hit anyone, just buying time. The train was entering the mountains now, beginning its climb toward Eagle Pass. Soon it would slow for the dangerous curve, and Cain's bounty hunters would be waiting. But Ryder and Eli had to get off before then, had to reach the spot where they'd planted their charges. "There," Ryder pointed ahead to a section of track where the train would slow for a slight grade. "We jump there." "Are you out of your mind?" a voice shouted from behind them. Ryder turned to see a well-dressed man climbing onto the roof. One of the railroad executives, probably, his face red with fury and exertion. "That gold belongs to the Union Mountain Railway. You're committing an act of war against progress itself." "Progress can afford to lose some pocket change," Ryder called back. "You'll get it back from your insurance." "There is no insurance for this. You're destroying years of work, ruining hundreds of investors." For just a moment, Ryder felt something that might have been guilt. These weren't outlaws he was robbing, or corrupt lawmen, or even the Dalton brothers who'd earned their fate. These were businessmen who'd built something, created something, pushed civilization into the wilderness. Then he remembered Harrison Drake and his offer of employment. Remembered being told to become a servant or be swept aside by history. Remembered every time the frontier had told him he was nothing, nobody, worthless. "Guess I'm just not a progress kind of man," he said, and jumped. The landing was brutal. Ryder hit the ground rolling, the gold in his bag slamming against his ribs hard enough to crack them. He tumbled through sage and rocks, tearing his clothes, scraping his skin, but somehow keeping hold of both his bag and his gun. Eli landed nearby with equal violence, his bag spilling open and scattering several gold bars across the ground. He scrambled to recover them while the train continued past, men shouting from its roof and windows. Ryder pulled out the detonator he'd been carrying, a simple plunger device connected to the charges they'd planted. The train was almost to the curve now, almost to where Cain's men waited in ambush. "Cover your ears," he told Eli. He pushed the plunger. The explosion tore through Eagle Pass like thunder, sending rock and steel and flame erupting into the sky. The tracks buckled, twisted, became impassable. The train's engineer saw it in time to brake, but the locomotive still plowed into the destruction, derailing in a screech of tortured metal. Behind the wreckage, cut off from any pursuit, Cain and his bounty hunters could only watch as their carefully laid trap became their prison. Ryder and Eli didn't wait to see the aftermath. They grabbed their gold and ran, disappearing into the mountains as the sound of the explosion echoed across the peaks. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs threatened to give out. They ran until the mountains swallowed them, and the railroad became a distant memory. They ran until they reached the hidden cache of supplies they'd stashed 2 days earlier. Fresh horses, water, ammunition, everything they'd need to disappear. Only then did Ryder allow himself to stop, to sit on a rock and assess what they'd accomplished. They'd robbed a train, actually robbed a moving train, stolen a fortune in gold from the Union Mountain Railway itself, and they'd done it in a way that would be talked about for generations. Eli sat beside him, equally exhausted, and wrote, "Did we just become legends?" Ryder looked at the canvas bags of gold, then at his partner, then at the vast wilderness stretching before them. "Yeah," he said, "I think we did." But even as he spoke, Ryder felt something hollow in the victory. They'd proven themselves. They'd made their mark. The frontier would remember their names. And yet, sitting here in the mountains with a fortune in stolen gold and nowhere to spend it, hunted by every lawman in 3 territories, Ryder wondered if legend was really what he'd been seeking all along, or if he'd just been running from the fear that without it, he was nothing. Eli seemed to sense his mood. He wrote, "What's wrong? We won." Did we? We've got the gold, but we can't use it. We've got our names in the history books, but we have to hide those names to survive. We've got each other, but for how long before a bullet or a rope catches up with us? You're thinking too much. Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally thinking clearly for the first time. Ryder stood, wincing at his injuries. Come on. We need to put more distance between us and that train before they organize a search party. They rode through the evening and into the night, following game trails and creek beds, erasing their tracks, using every trick Ryder had learned in 10 years of staying alive. By dawn, they'd covered 30 miles and reached an abandoned miner's cabin where they could hole up and rest. Inside the cabin, while Eli tended their wounds and organized their supplies, Ryder counted the gold. 53 bars, each worth roughly $4,000. Over $200,000 in total, enough to live like kings for the rest of their lives, if they could ever stop running long enough to spend it. Eli finished bandaging Ryder's ribs and wrote, "Now what?" It was the same question he'd asked before, but this time it carried more weight. They'd achieved their impossible goal. They'd pulled off the robbery that would make them legends. Everything from here was uncharted territory. "I don't know," Ryder admitted. "For the first time in my life, I genuinely don't know what comes next." Eli considered this, then wrote something longer than usual. "Maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe not knowing means we get to choose." Ryder read those words several times, feeling their truth settle into his bones. For 10 years, he'd been reacting to poverty, to violence, to the frontier's cruelty, to his own need for significance. He'd been driven by what he was running from, not what he was running toward. But now, sitting in this abandoned cabin with more money than he knew what to do with, And the only person he'd ever truly trusted, maybe it was time to stop running and start choosing. "All right," he said, "let's choose. What do you want, Eli? Really want, if nothing was stopping you?" Eli thought for a long time before writing. "Place to belong. People who don't see me as broken or useless. Chance to build something that matters." "That's it? That's what you want from all this?" "What do you want?" Ryder opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. The truth was, he didn't know anymore. He'd thought he wanted to be remembered, to be somebody, to matter. And he'd achieved that. His name would be spoken in saloons and written in newspapers. Songs would be sung about Ryder Cain, the outlaw who robbed a moving train. But none of that filled the hollow space inside him. "I want what you want," he said finally. "A place to belong, a purpose beyond just surviving. And maybe—" He paused, surprised by his own words. "Maybe I want to be worth remembering for something other than theft and violence." Eli smiled and wrote, "Then let's find that, together." They spent the next week in that cabin, healing and planning, studying maps and newspapers, looking for a place where two outlaws with a fortune in stolen gold could become something more than their crimes. And slowly, impossibly, an idea began to form. An idea that would change everything. An idea that would give them both what they'd been searching for all along. The idea came from a newspaper article Eli found tucked between accounts of their train robbery. A small town in Montana called Clearwater Valley was struggling, its residents facing eviction by a mining company that claimed rights to the land beneath their homes. The article was brief, almost an afterthought, but something about it caught Eli's attention. He showed it to Ryder without comment, just held it out and waited. Ryder read it twice, his mind working through possibilities. "You thinking what I think you're thinking?" Eli wrote, "We could help them. Use the gold to buy the land rights, save the town. And become heroes instead of outlaws? Not heroes, just people who choose something different." Ryder stared at the article, feeling the weight of the choice before them. They could disappear with their fortune, live quietly somewhere until the heat died down, spend the rest of their days looking over their shoulders. Or they could do something that actually mattered, something that gave their crimes purpose beyond personal gain. It was insane. It was dangerous. It went against every survival instinct he possessed, which was exactly why it felt right. "All right," he said, "let's go save a town. But we do it smart. New names, different story. Nobody can know we're the ones who robbed that train." They spent 3 days crafting their new identities. Ryder became Ryan Carter, a prospector who'd struck it rich in California. Eli was his partner, Ellis Boone, close enough to his real name that he'd respond to it naturally. They bought new clothes from a general store 2 towns over, trading their dusty outlaw gear for the respectable attire of successful businessmen. The transformation was startling. Looking at himself in a mirror, clean-shaven and well-dressed, Ryder barely recognized the man staring back. Gone was the dangerous outlaw with hard eyes and a reputation written in blood. In his place stood someone who could walk into a bank or a courthouse without immediately drawing suspicion. Eli underwent a similar change, though his transformation went deeper. Dressed in a good suit with his hair properly trimmed, he carried himself with quiet dignity rather than the wariness of someone accustomed to being overlooked or mocked. He looked like a man of substance, a partner worthy of respect. They practiced their story until it became second nature. Ryan Carter and Ellis Boone, prospecting partners who'd made their fortune and were looking to invest in a struggling community. Philanthropists with money to spend and no obvious connection to any recent robberies. The journey to Clearwater Valley took 5 days, riding horses purchased legitimately and carrying their gold hidden in specially constructed saddlebags that looked like ordinary luggage. They traveled openly, staying in hotels, eating in restaurants, acting like men with nothing to hide. It felt strange. After years of skulking in shadows and avoiding attention, walking freely through the world was almost disorienting. But Ryder found he liked it. The simple pleasure of ordering a meal without wondering if someone would recognize him, of sleeping in a real bed without expecting to wake to gunfire. Clearwater Valley revealed itself gradually as they crested a ridge on the 6th day. The town sat in a wide river valley, surrounded by mountains that still held snow on their peaks. Farms spread across the bottomland, fields of wheat and corn golden in the late summer sun. The town itself was modest but well kept, with a church steeple rising above the other buildings and smoke curling from chimneys. It looked peaceful, worth saving. They rode in at midday, drawing curious glances from residents who weren't accustomed to well-dressed strangers. Ryder tipped his hat politely to a woman hanging laundry, and she smiled uncertainly in return. The town's only hotel was a 2-story building with a restaurant attached. They took rooms and spent the afternoon just listening, learning the rhythms of Clearwater Valley. The restaurant served as the social hub, and by evening, Ryder had heard enough conversations to understand the situation. The Consolidated Mining Company claimed they'd found silver deposits beneath the valley. They'd bought the mineral rights from the territorial government years ago, before the town existed, and now they wanted to exercise those rights. The residents argued that the mining would destroy their farms and homes, but legally, they had no ground to stand on, unless someone bought the mineral rights from Consolidated. That night, Ryder and Eli sat in their room planning their approach. The challenge wasn't having enough money. They had more than enough. The challenge was appearing legitimate, explaining their wealth without raising questions about its source. "We tell them we're investors," Ryder said, "that we see potential in Clearwater Valley and want to preserve it as agricultural land rather than see it torn up by mining. It's the truth, mostly." Eli wrote, "They'll want to know why. Strangers don't just save towns for no reason. So we give them a reason. We're planning to settle here ourselves. Want to ensure the community stays intact." Ryder paced the small room, working through the story. "It's not even a lie. Where else are we going to go? Might as well be here. You want to stay? Permanently?" The question stopped Ryder mid-stride. Did he want to stay? The old Ryder Cain would have laughed at the idea of settling down, of trading adventure for stability. But that version of himself had died somewhere between the train robbery and this quiet hotel room, replaced by someone who was tired of running and ready to build instead of destroy. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think I do." Eli smiled and wrote, "Then let's make it happen." The next morning, they requested a meeting with the town council. The council consisted of 5 people: the mayor, a farmer named Thomas Brennan, the school teacher, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Mitchell, the blacksmith, a massive man called Big Pete, the general store owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, and the pastor, a young man with an earnest face named Father Michael. They met in the church, sitting in pews while Ryder and Eli stood before them explaining their proposal. "Let me make sure I understand," Mayor Brennan said, his weathered face skeptical. "You want to buy the mineral rights from Consolidated Mining and then just give them to the town? Out of the goodness of your hearts?" "Not give," Ryder clarified. "We'd retain ownership, but grant you permanent agricultural use. The land stays farmland, no mining, no disruption. You continue living as you have been." "And what do you get out of this?" Sarah Mitchell asked. Her eyes were intelligent and suspicious, the look of someone who'd learned not to trust easy promises. "A place to settle. A community worth being part of. We've spent years chasing fortune, Miss Mitchell. Now we'd like to use some of that fortune to build something lasting." "How much fortune are we talking about?" Big Pete rumbled. "Buying mineral rights from a company like Consolidated won't be cheap. We're prepared to offer up to $200,000. The silence that followed was absolute. Mrs. Chen actually gasped. Father Michael's mouth fell open. Mayor Brennan found his voice first. That's an extraordinary sum. Where did you get that kind of money?" This was the dangerous moment. The question they'd known would come, but hoped to deflect. Ryder kept his expression calm, his voice steady. "California goldfields. We struck a rich vein 5 years ago, sold the claim to a larger operation. The money's been sitting in a San Francisco bank ever since. We're tired of it just sitting there. We want to do something meaningful with it." He could see Sarah Mitchell studying him, looking for the lie. But the story was close enough to truth that he could tell it without flinching. They had struck it rich, just not the way he was implying. "I'd like to see proof," she said. "Bank documents, letters of credit. If you're asking us to trust you with our future, we need to know you're legitimate." "Of course." Ryder pulled out forged documents they'd purchased from a skilled counterfeiter in Denver. Banking letters, ownership papers, all the trappings of legitimate wealth. The counterfeiter had charged them 3 gold bars for his work, but it had been worth every ounce. Sarah examined the documents carefully, her teacher's mind parsing every detail. Finally, she nodded. These appear to be in order. Then I propose we take a vote, Mayor Brennan said. All in favor of accepting Mr. Carter and Mr. Boone's offer to negotiate with Consolidated Mining on our behalf? 4 hands went up immediately. Sarah Mitchell hesitated, her eyes still on Ryder, still searching for the catch. Then, slowly, her hand rose as well. Unanimous, Brennan declared. Gentlemen, you have our authorization to proceed, and our gratitude. The negotiations with Consolidated Mining took 3 weeks and tested every ounce of patience Ryder possessed. The company's representative, a snake oil lawyer named Whitmore, tried every trick to inflate the price and drag out the process. But Ryder had learned negotiation in saloons and outlaw camps, where the wrong word could get you killed. Compared to that, dealing with Whitmore was almost pleasant. They settled on $175,000 for the mineral rights, a fortune by any measure, but less than Ryder had feared. The remaining gold would be enough to build a life here, to invest in the community, to become the kind of men who mattered for reasons beyond violence. The day the papers were signed, Clearwater Valley celebrated. Someone organized a dance in the town square. Lanterns were strung between buildings, and a fiddle player produced music that made people forget their troubles for an evening. Children ran wild, their laughter echoing off the mountains. Adults who'd faced eviction just weeks earlier now danced and sang with the relief of people granted a reprieve from disaster. Ryder stood at the edge of the celebration, watching it all with something he barely recognized: contentment. Eli appeared beside him, holding 2 glasses of punch someone had pressed into his hands. Not bad for a couple of outlaws, Ryder said, accepting a glass. Eli wrote, "Feels strange, being thanked instead of hunted." Better strange than dead. Ryder sipped the punch, too sweet, but made with genuine appreciation. You think we can make this work? Actually live here? Be part of this? Depends. Can you stop being Ryder Cain? That was the real question, wasn't it? Could he leave behind the legend he'd worked so hard to build? Could he become Ryan Carter completely, bury the outlaw identity so deep that even he forgot it existed? Before he could answer, Sarah Mitchell approached, her expression still carrying that hint of suspicion, but softened by the evening's joy. Mr. Carter, I wanted to thank you properly. What you've done for this town, we could never repay it. No repayment needed, Miss Mitchell. We're just glad we could help. I'm sure you are. Though I can't help wondering why 2 prospectors from California would choose Clearwater Valley specifically. There must be 100 towns facing similar troubles. Ryder met her eyes, saw the intelligence there, the determination to protect her community from any threat. She was testing him, still looking for the truth beneath the polite lies. Honestly, we saw the article by chance, and something about it resonated. Maybe we were tired of just accumulating wealth. Maybe we wanted to prove that money could do something good for once. He paused, then added, or maybe we were just lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time. Sarah studied him for a long moment, then smiled slightly. Well, whatever your reasons, you've saved this town. That makes you family now, Mr. Carter, and family looks out for each other. She walked away before Ryder could respond, leaving him with the strange, unsettling feeling that she knew more than she was saying. But if she suspected the truth, she'd chosen to keep it to herself. Maybe that was what community meant, accepting people despite their pasts, giving them room to become something better. The celebration continued late into the night. Ryder and Eli eventually retired to the hotel, exhausted but satisfied. Tomorrow they would start the real work of building their new lives. Tonight, they could rest knowing they'd accomplished something that mattered. But the frontier had a way of never letting you rest for long. The trouble arrived 4 days later in the form of a telegram delivered to Mayor Brennan. Ryder was in the general store when Brennan found him, the mayor's face pale and worried. Mr. Carter, I need to speak with you, privately. They went to the mayor's office, where Brennan handed over the telegram with shaking hands. Ryder read it, his blood turning cold. It was from Sheriff Marcus Webb. The message was brief and damning. Have reason to believe Ryan Carter is actually outlaw Ryder Cain. Request authorization to investigate. Reward for capture $20,000. Is it true? Brennan asked quietly. Ryder could have lied. could have manufactured outrage, denied everything, demanded proof. But looking at this man who'd put his town's trust in them, who'd accepted their help when desperation gave him few choices, Ryder found he couldn't add another lie to the pile. "Yes," he said simply, "it's true." Brennan sat down heavily, his hands gripping the desk edge. "The train robbery. The gold. That was you. That was me. Us. Ellis and I." Ryder pulled out a chair and sat across from the mayor, deciding that honesty, however risky, was the only path forward. "Everything we told you about wanting to settle down, about using our money for something good, that was true. The part we left out was how we got the money. You're wanted criminals. We were, but we're trying to be something different now. By using stolen gold to buy our town's future?" Brennan's voice rose with anger and betrayal. "Do you have any idea what you've done? When this comes out, Consolidated could claim the sale was illegal. Everything we've built here could collapse." "I know, which is why it can't come out." Ryder leaned forward. "Webb doesn't have proof. He's guessing, fishing for confirmation. If you deny it, if the town stands by us, he's got nothing. You're asking us to harbor fugitives, to lie to a lawman. I'm asking you to judge us by our actions, not our pasts. We saved this town. We're not hurting anyone anymore. We just want to live quietly and be part of something good." Brennan stood, pacing his small office. Ryder could see the war playing out on his face. Duty versus gratitude, law versus loyalty, principle versus pragmatism. "I need to discuss this with the council," Brennan said finally. "This isn't my decision alone." "I understand. Whatever you decide, we'll accept it." The council meeting was called for that evening. Ryder and Eli weren't invited, told to wait in the hotel while their fate was decided. The waiting was agony, worse than facing guns or planning robberies. At least in those situations, Ryder had control. Here, he could only hope that the good they'd done would outweigh the crimes they'd committed. Eli tried to distract them with cards, but neither could focus. Finally, he wrote, "If they turn us in, we could run. Right now. Be gone before Webb arrives." "We could," Ryder agreed, "but I'm tired of running. If they want to hand us over, maybe that's what we deserve." "You've changed." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally becoming who I should have been all along." Ryder looked at his partner, his friend, really, the only person who'd stood by him through everything. "Thank you for sticking with me through all this insanity." Eli smiled and wrote, "Nowhere else I'd rather be." The knock on their door came an hour after sunset. Mayor Brennan stood in the hallway, his expression unreadable. "The council has reached a decision. We'd like you both to come to the church." They walked through the dark streets, passing buildings they'd helped save, homes filled with families who could sleep safely because of what they'd done. Whatever happened next, Ryder found he had no regrets. The legend of Ryder Cain would fade eventually, but the town of Clearwater Valley would endure. The church was full. Every adult in town had gathered, sitting in pews or standing along the walls. The council sat at the front, their faces grave. Ryder and Eli walked down the center aisle, feeling hundreds of eyes on them. Mayor Brennan stood to address the assembly. "We've spent the evening discussing a difficult situation. Mr. Carter and Mr. Boone, or rather Ryder Cain and Eli Boone, have been honest with us about their pasts. They are wanted men. They obtained the money they used to save our town through criminal means." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some faces showed shock, others anger, a few satisfaction at having their suspicions confirmed. "However," Brennan continued, raising his voice, "we must also acknowledge what they've done for Clearwater Valley. They could have disappeared with their fortune. Instead, they chose to use it to save strangers. They asked nothing in return except the chance to become part of our community." Sarah Mitchell stood. "The law is the law, Thomas. We can't just ignore it because we benefited from crime. Can't we?" Big Pete rose, his massive frame dominating the space. "The law says mining companies can destroy our homes because they bought rights to the ground beneath us. The law says men like Webb can claim victories they didn't earn and hunt good people for reward money. Maybe the law isn't always right." "So we become outlaws ourselves?" Sarah challenged. "We harbor criminals and lie to authorities?" "We protect our own, Siamis says," Chen said quietly, standing with difficulty, her aged frame supported by a cane. These men saved us. In my country, there's a saying, a debt of life cannot be repaid, only honored. They gave us back our lives, our homes, our future. That means something. One by one, people stood, some arguing for turning them in, more arguing for protecting them. The debate grew heated, voices rising, the community torn between law and loyalty. Finally, Father Michael raised his hands for silence. I think we're asking the wrong question, he said. We're debating whether to judge these men by their worst moments or their best. But perhaps the real question is simpler. What kind of community do we want to be? He turned to address Ryder and Eli directly. You came here carrying the weight of your crimes. You used stolen money for good purposes. That doesn't erase what you did, but it speaks to who you're trying to become. The question is, are you done? With the robberies, the violence, the outlaw life? Or are you just hiding until the heat dies down? Ryder stepped forward, his voice carrying to every corner of the church. I spent 10 years building a reputation as someone to be feared. I robbed, I fought, I hurt people. I told myself it was survival, that the frontier made me this way, but the truth is simpler. I was angry and lost and convinced that being feared was the same as mattering. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Then I met Eli, and for the first time I had someone who saw past the legend to the person underneath. Someone who made me want to be better. We robbed that train, yes, stole a fortune. But standing here in this church, looking at all of you, I realized that the money was never the real prize. The real prize is this: being part of something bigger than myself. Having people who know my worst and might choose to believe in me anyway. He met Sarah Mitchell's eyes, then Mayor Brennan's, then swept his gaze across the assembled town. I can't change my past, but I can promise you this. Ryder Cain is dead. I buried him the day we rode into this valley. What you have now is Ryan Carter, a man who just wants to build a life worth living. If you'll let me. The silence stretched. Then, slowly, Mrs. Chen began to applaud. Big Pete joined her. Then others, the sound building until most of the church was clapping. Not everyone. Sarah Mitchell stood with her arms crossed, her expression conflicted. A handful of others looked equally uncertain. But the majority had made their choice. Mayor Brennan called for quiet. We'll put it to a vote. All in favor of responding to Sheriff Webb that we know nothing of any Ryder Cain in Clearwater Valley, that Ryan Carter and Ellis Boone are upstanding members of our community? Hands rose throughout the church. Brennan counted carefully. 47 in favor, 12 opposed. The community has spoken. He turned to Ryder and Eli. Welcome home, gentlemen. Try not to make us regret this. The relief that flooded through Ryder was almost overwhelming. They'd gambled everything on the hope that good deeds could outweigh bad ones, that people might choose compassion over law, and they'd won. But the victory came with responsibility. They couldn't just be residents of Clearwater Valley. They had to become the people the town believed them to be. The following months transformed them both. Ryan now, he had to remind himself, invested the remaining gold in the town's future. He funded the expansion of the school, giving Sarah Mitchell the resources to hire an assistant teacher and buy proper books. He helped Big Pete upgrade his smithy with modern equipment. He worked alongside farmers during harvest, learning a different kind of hard labor than he'd ever known. Eli became Ellis, and the change suited him. No longer invisible, no longer discounted because of his silence, he became an integral part of the community. His sharp eyes and careful attention to detail made him invaluable for settling disputes and planning improvements. Children followed him around, fascinated by his ability to communicate without words, learning sign language he taught them. Together, they built a house on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, but solid and permanent, with a view of the mountains and room for growth. It was the first place either of them had ever truly called home. Winter came, blanketing the valley in snow and forcing the community to draw close. Ryan and Ellis learned the rhythms of small-town life, church socials, barn raisings, shared meals, and shared troubles. They learned names, histories, the intricate web of relationships that bound Clearwater Valley together. And slowly, impossibly, they began to heal. Spring arrived with the melt, turning the valley green and bringing new challenges. A late frost threatened the wheat crop. A child fell through river ice and had to be rescued. A fire in the general store required the whole town to rebuild. Through it all, Ryan and Ellis were there, working alongside their neighbors, proving through action that they belonged. News of the outside world filtered in occasionally. The hunt for Ryder Cain eventually cooled as newer crimes demanded attention. The railroad hired investigators who never found the gold or the outlaws who stole it. Webb's reputation took a hit when his claims about Ryan Carter proved baseless, and he quietly retired to avoid further embarrassment. The Dalton brothers were caught attempting another robbery and hanged in Kansas. Harrison Drake's consortium collapsed amid corruption scandals. The frontier moved on, as it always did, forgetting yesterday's outlaws in favor of today's problems. And in a small valley in Montana, two former criminals built a life worth living. 1 year to the day after they'd first arrived in Clearwater Valley, Sarah Mitchell approached Ryan at the church social. She'd softened toward them over the months, though she still watched with a teacher's critical eye. "I owe you an apology," she said without preamble. "I was wrong to doubt you." "You were right to doubt us," Ryan replied. "We were criminals. We lied to you. But you also saved us, and you've kept your promise to become better men." She smiled slightly. "I teach children that people can change if they choose to. I should apply that lesson to adults as well." "Thank you, Sarah. That means more than you know." "There's something else." She pulled out a folded newspaper. "I thought you should see this." Ryan unfolded it and found himself staring at his own face, or rather, a sketch of Ryder Cain, labeled as part of a retrospective on famous outlaws of the frontier era. The article described his crimes, his legend, and his mysterious disappearance after the train robbery. It concluded by speculating that he'd probably died in the mountains, his body never found. "The frontier thinks you're dead," Sarah said. "Maybe that's for the best." Ryan stared at the sketch, the hard eyes, the dangerous expression, the man he'd been. That person felt like a stranger now, someone from a different life. "Maybe it is," he agreed. He threw the newspaper into the fire that evening, watching Ryder Cain burn to ash. Ellis sat beside him, understanding without words what the gesture meant. 2 years became 3. 3 became 5. The seasons cycled, children grew, the town prospered. Ryan and Ellis aged into their new identities until even they sometimes forgot they'd ever been anyone else. They never spoke of the robberies, the violence, the desperate flight through darkness. That life belonged to ghosts. What they had now was real, friendships built on trust, purpose found in service, peace earned through daily choice to be better than they'd been. One autumn evening, sitting on their porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, Ellis wrote a question he'd never asked before. "Any regrets?" Ryan thought about it honestly. The people he'd hurt, the fear he'd spread, the years wasted on anger and pride, all of it had consequences he could never fully repair. But those choices had also led him here, to this porch, to this life, to this friendship that had saved them both. "Only that it took me so long to find this," he said finally, "to find you, to find home." Ellis smiled and wrote, "Better late than never." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness gathered, two former outlaws who'd found something more valuable than gold or glory. They'd found redemption through the simple act of choosing differently. The frontier would remember Ryder Cain as a legend, a name whispered in saloons and written in history books. But the man who'd carried that name had become something better. A neighbor, a friend, a member of a community that measured worth not in violence but in contribution. And in the end, that was the only legend that truly mattered. The one you lived every day, in the faces of people you helped, the lives you touched, the world you left better than you found it. Ryan Carter had no fame, no fearsome reputation, no songs sung about his exploits. But he had a home. He had purpose. He had people who knew his worst and chose to believe in his best. And as the stars emerged above Clearwater Valley, he realized that was more than enough. It was everything.